Board. Share my screen. One more time. Okay. I think we're set. Uh, anyone on Zoom, do you see the presentation?
Sure do.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. Thank
Yes,
you.
we do.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Patty. Awesome. Thank you for being on the call. Kelly, it's always great to see you as well. So awesome. Okay. Okay. So a lot of moving parts. All right, so today's topic, all right, this is a brand new form, okay? This form just came out December of 2024, okay? The Transfer of Buyer Representation Agreement, okay? What the heck is a transfer of a buyer representation agreement, okay? So we're going to dive into the presentation slide. Then I will ultimately show you the actual form and what the purpose around that form is, okay? So you guys ready? You guys excited? Boring material. I'm going to try to make it as entertaining as I usually try. But again, if you have any questions, please raise your hand here in class. And if you're on Zoom, just say, "Hey, Simon, I have a question," or put it on the chat as well. Okay? Yes.
About 10 years ago, I saw 4 units that came out in San Pedro and I met an outfit.
Yeah.
And then about 2 weeks later, I had a friend, he liked it. And then that's why I transferred to him. Is that what we're talking about?
No. So the transfer of buyer representation, remember all of you, right? Working with the buyer, working with the seller, there's documentation that we must do. More so as a buyer with all of the changes that transpired last year, right? Now you have to emphasize the importance when you're having a conversation to a buyer, okay? It's the consulting parameters, okay? And if the buyer is going to work with you, we have to have a written agreement with that buyer. It's a mutual agreement, okay? They're working with you, you're working with them. We just solidify the agreement in writing. That's what we call the buyer representation agreement, better known as the BRBC, okay? Now, the question in today's topic is going to be regarding a transfer, okay? Where we transfer from one brokerage to another. You come from a small boutique and you now are part of KW, okay? There has to be a procedure and a process because let's just say, theoretically speaking, okay, that you came from a small boutique now to an international real estate company like Keller Williams. Well, you started the original agreement with that brokerage, right? Well, similar to a listing agreement, the brokerage has to release that agreement to be able to transfer over to the new brokerage. You cannot just say, "I'm going to take my client to the new brokerage." Doesn't work that way. The brokerage has the authority to allow us the transfer, but there is procedures and process. I'm going to explain that in greater details. Okay, so the form, the transfer of buyer representation agreement. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. All right. So the transfer of buyer representation, better known as the TOBR form, is a new car form designed to facilitate the transition of a buyer representation from one brokerage to another while maintaining transparency and legal compliance. Here's the breakdown of how this is going to work, okay? Again, I want to emphasize and stress, this is if you have a written agreement with the buyer. If you have no written agreement and you decide to come to KW, then you don't need to provide this form. It's only when you had a previous buyer representation agreement, okay? And the company is involved, right? Because there's language in there that says on the buyer representation agreement is that the buyer's going to work with you, but it also reflects your brokerage, right? So the brokerage owns the process, just similar to the listing agreement. The listing can be released or will either stay with the brokerage as well. It's a discretion, okay? And this is again for the integrity of the process and ultimately making sure that the agents too, because there may be liability when it comes to this as well, folks, okay? So I want to be very clear on those expectations. All right, the form is created to help brokers when a buyer agent leaves one broker company for another and continues to work on a buyer representation agreement or an escrow. Okay, so it works two ways. All right, because again, full transparency when it comes to the process, folks. All right, typically you transfer from one brokerage to another brokerage. Let's just say, for example, you're an escrow, right? Typically, that property or excuse me, that process of that particular transaction will stay with the current brokerage. Because once it's an escrow, it's not going to be able to transfer, right? No brokerage or broker will release that because what are we trying to gain from that? Okay. Company dollars, commission from it. Okay. But also, when it comes to a buyer representation agreement, the brokerage has the authority to either release it, not release it, or release it with some type of compensation. Okay. What we call a referral. So the purpose of the TOBR form is to be used when a buyer has an existing buyer representation and broker compensation agreement, better known as the BRBC, with one broker but wants to switch to a new brokerage. It serves as a written acknowledgement and agreement regarding the transfer and the representation rights, okay? And again, as soon as I'm done with the presentation, folks, what I'm going to illustrate is the sample form that I've already completed for you, just so you get an understanding, right, on what the form looks like. It also attaches the agency agreement as part of the process, okay? So we'll go through all of those elements as well, okay? Failure to document the transfer to the new broker can be a DRE violation and present problems which are errors in emissions insurance. Okay. No one wants to get in trouble by the Department of Real Estate, right? Raise your hand if you do. Raise your hand if you do. Of course not, right? Yeah, because it can open up a can of worms as well when it comes to this. And see, a lot of agents just don't know what they don't know. Okay. And this is again the whole reason the process and understanding and how to maneuver because agents will bounce from brokerages to brokerages. We get that. But if we have an agreement with someone while you were here or while you were with another brokerage, they have the authority to say, no, 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 we're going to maintain this relationship and we're going to keep it in house. Or, you know what? We're okay. You know what? I understand the circumstances. We'll go ahead and release, right? Or sometimes we may have to transfer the buyer to another agent. Buyer may be fuming, upset, calls the broker. Hey, are you the broker? Yes, I am. Well, I have a problem with John Smith. Okay. I says, okay, no problem. Let me reach out and find out what happened, right? I talked to John Smith. Hey, John Smith, I have Joe Smith here saying that he's not happy. Oh, you know what? I'm just tired. I don't want to deal with it. Not a problem. Look, I want to still maintain that relationship because they're threatened to file a complaint. Okay. What if I do this? Okay. What if I get another seasoned experienced agent in-house and pay you a referral? Okay. And let this other person close it for us. That's fine. If I'm going to collect something for doing anything, not doing anything, I'm good with that. Okay. So then I call the client, hey, I got some great news for you. What if I do this? As the broker, I have the authority to, transfer you to another agent. Okay. That's the awesome part. We have so many agents here that are amazing that will do good. Let me put you with another season experience. That would be great, right? So then that's kind of the dynamics and how we can do stuff, something like this with the transfer, right? Because even though they're in-house, right, we still need a document to make sure that all of us are on the same page so we know exactly what we're doing. Make sense? Okay, cool. All right, got a couple people I have to admit, so give me 1 second. All right. So the key features and functions, okay? One, consist. Hold on 1 second. Let me admit a couple more people in here. All right. So key features, consents and release. The original broker must agree to release the buyer from their obligations under the BRBC, better known as the Buyer Representation Agreement and Compensation. This ensures that there is no disputes over compensation, right? Because we all know, right, that commissions are important, right? We don't want to lose commission, especially if this buyer is $1 million or more, right? And they're pre-approved, right? They have the funds, right? They're ready to buy, right? But circumstances and issues happen, right? So how do we maneuver and navigate those parameters? Okay. Number two, compensation consideration. If the original broker is entitled to compensation under the BRBC, right? Because if you really think about it, if I'm representing a buyer, right, I have an exclusive form signed by the buyer that they're going to be working with me exclusively, right, for 3 months. Okay. We have already done X, Y, and Z. And I have the agreement. Here's the agreement that I have an executed agreement with the buyer, right? Now I'm working, doing my due diligence, showing property and all that fun stuff, right? But the responsibility, because there is a section, folks, on the BRBC says about compensation. What I'm charging the buyer to pay me to do my job, okay? That basically means I'm working for you for the purpose of compensation. I will provide you goods, and in return, I get paid for my services. That's the agreement, right? So if let's say that the BRBC has a 2.5%, right? That I'm charging the buyer. Now, I want you to have two heads here, two different, a buyer agent, mindset and head, and a listing agent's head as well, okay? Meaning because you know that as a listing agent, you also get paid for helping sell their property, right? But also the buyer, you get paid for finding, identifying a property that they're willing to make an offer on with the hopes that their offer gets accepted, right? Once the offer gets accepted, then we go through the initial due diligence period, right? With the goal to close the deal. Because we all know we're not paid from the beginning, right? We're not going to say, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, here's my fee of $35,000. Pay me, right? That would be nice, right? But the essence, that's not the way we work, right? Now, please understand too that both buyer and seller can pay you compensation. What? What are you saying, Simon? Yeah, both can pay you. Okay, if done correctly. Okay. So on the agreement, it has Keller Williams, right? Keller Williams. So therefore, we have interest as well as you. You are doing all the legwork. We're protecting you under the umbrella. Therefore, we have the right also to hold on to that contract. And we have the right to transfer that buyer to another agent if we choose to, because you just never know. Let's just say, God forbid, something happens to you, or you're in the hospital, you cannot facilitate, we're in the middle of something. I have to delegate it, or I have to take control of that transaction for you. But let's just say we have to transfer it to another agent that's going to finish it. This is the whole reason behind that transfer form. Make sense? Okay. So compensation outlines the compensation under the BRBC, but outlines in any negotiating terms regarding fees, commissions, or waivers. Number three, documents the intent. The new broker now represents the buyer, protecting both parties from potential conflict, right? again, just full transparency, right? Again, this is why it's so important, folks, to make sure that everything that we do in real estate, okay, that is real estate 101, is to have paper trail, okay? Because you're not going to remember what happened 3 weeks, a month, 3 months ago, right? But if you have something in writing, you can always reference, right? And go back, and that's going to jot your mind. It says, that's right. Now I remember what transpired. It may just bring something that you totally forgot. This is why it's important to document everything you do. Because again, that's a protection for all parties. Because there may be a dispute. The buyer may say, no, 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 I don't remember signing a 3% commission with you. On the contrary, here's the form, here's your initials, here's your signature, and the date that you signed this. Here's the proof. Number 4, avoid legal disputes. The form helps prevent issues related to dual representation or commission disputes by formalizing the transfer in writing, right? Again, just what I said, everything must be documented, everything must be in writing. Paragraph 1 acknowledges and agrees the transfer from the original broker to a new broker, okay? And we'll touch on that as soon as I populate the form so you'll see what form I'm talking about. Bless you. Okay, when to use the TOBR form? When a buyer who has already signed a BRBC wants to work with a different broker. Ooh. Let's say you're facilitating an open house, right? You're minding your business, right? What's the intent and what's the purpose of hosting an open house?
Get buyers.
Yeah. The whole purpose is to try to see if you can get a buyer that wants to work with you, or even a possible seller, right? A seller may come in, maybe a neighbor, and you jive and vibe with that individual, and they trust you, and they say, well, by the way, can you give me a value of what my property is? I'm thinking of selling my home, right? That's a good day, right? That's why you do open houses, for those opportunities, okay? But again, buyers will make split decisions. And maybe they're not happy with their current broker and agent, right? That can happen. But if they have a buyer agreement as a listing agent, we cannot, facilitate or help them because they have an agreement with a real estate brokerage and an agent. This is why we ask the question, are you working with an agent at an open house, right? What do most buyers say? Nope, I'm not, but they may be, right? But we have to ask those questions, full transparency. Because what if they say, yeah, I do have a signed agreement with a agent, but I'm not happy? I understand. And sometimes you're not going to get the same level of experience as much as you would with me, because I work and I'm, do my very best. And they may like that. They may see how you work in your work ethic, right? And they may want to make a decision to terminate that agreement. And that's fine, because there's a form that allows the termination. Okay. But that brokerage has to release that buyer to be able to work with you. And again, that's where this form comes into place. Yes, Jimmy.
Is that allowable for you to kind of promote that, say, are you happy when, once he answers yes?
Yeah, it's perfectly fine to ask embedded questions. Again, you're just having a conversation. Now, I want to stress, you're not going to lure them and say, well, you need to work with me. You're not going to do any of that stuff because that can be unethical, right? And we don't want to have an ethics complaint, because the minute that agent knows that you coerced the buyer to work with you or manipulated the conversation and made it look like they're bad, we're good, that can be a problem. And it only takes that one individual agent to file a complaint against you, okay? It's always best to have them handle their own affairs. They're responsible. They're the ones that signed the agreement. They're responsible to also, if they're not happy, to terminate that agreement as well. That's simple, folks, okay? Do not get yourself involved in a scenario that may jeopardize your position. Say again? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. All right. So paragraph 2 goes and addresses whether the original broker will be paid to allow the transfer payment to, and can be from the principal or the new brokerage. Again, who owns the agreement? The original broker, absolutely, right? And that original broker has to give us that release, okay? And that release will dictate if that buyer is going to be working with a new agent or going to be working with the same agent now transferring to us. Because an agent can be transferred too, right? The agent may want to transfer brokerages, but the brokerage would have to release us or release the agreement in order for it to be transferred. Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and continue. Here's some takeaways for agents and brokers. Always check if the buyer has an active BRBC before engaging in a representation. Can you ask, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, do you have a written agreement with the agent? The answer is yes, you can. Yeah, that's part of the process because you want to work with someone that doesn't have an agreement, okay? Because now you can facilitate the conversation around how can I help you find and identify a property? Make sense? Everyone say yes. Louder?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so engaging the representation ensures that the TOBR is properly completed, signed to avoid any potential liability issues. If a commission was agreed upon in the original BRBC, negotiate the document whether the release broker or brokerage is waiving it or expecting compensation. Yeah. Interesting, right? As I've been saying, they have the right to transfer it, but they also have the right to compensation to release. And they may use that as a strategy. Because let's just say that this buyer agent has put time, effort, and energy, been driving around showing properties, and now the buyer goes in a different direction. That's not cool. Okay. But if I have a written agreement, that will determine the factor of how we're going to release this agreement because we're still entitled to some compensation. Okay. Hold that down for 1 minute. So in essence, the previous brokerage has the ability to say no compensation is needed. You could go ahead and transfer, okay? Or we'll do it with some type of consideration, some type of concessions. Question.
Or how it to sign an agreement, or how still show relative, or how limited we can. So now we have to write down. We have to sign that. We refuse to sign.
Are you referring to the buyer representation agreement? Well, again, with all of the new changes, prior to January 1st of this year, you had to have a written agreement the minute you talk real estate. That was how it was worded. Okay. Now it's when it's practical or when it's in the position where you're going to be submitting an offer, you must have a buyer representation agreement. Okay.
Before.
So yeah, you want to have a written agreement. I And again, let me just kind of give you two sides to that, right? Because prior to all of this NAR settlement that transpired last year, right? A lot of agents were not using agreements in place. They weren't. They would just honor the buyer and says, look, if I find a property, we'll go ahead and submit an offer. And there was never an agreement in place. The problem that was happening a lot is the buyer goes and works with another buyer agent. And now it's like, what happened? I've been working so much with this buyer, can I go after for compensation? The first thing most brokers will say, did you have an agreement with the buyer? No, I didn't. Well, it's going to be very hard to go after because they're going to have more evidence, right? That agent probably had a signed agreement. That agent submitted an offer. That agent probably got the offer accepted. So the scale of weight holds more on that. We're not going to win in this case. I can tell you from personal experience. Okay. So this is why now it's a must. Anytime you're working with the buyer, have an agreement. It doesn't have to be an exclusive, it could be a non-exclusive, but you have to have something in writing. Okay, that's to be in compliance. Okay, so to answer your question is, yeah, you want to have that agreement signed as soon as practical, right? Just because, remember, that buyer can be working with multiple agents. You want to know how much service you're going to be providing this buyer. Okay. Because I don't want you to spend so much time and energy when that buyer is not being realistic, right? And this is why you want to anchor the conversation, sit with them and consult with them and make sure they're legitimate and are ready to buy something or their motivation is. Maybe not just this minute, but in the near future. But again, the engagement starts with your written agreement. Does that make sense? Okay. Paragraph number 3 acknowledges the termination of the agency relationship with the original broker. Okay, so there's language on there that I'll share with you momentarily on, the do's and don'ts of the agreement. Okay. All right, let me just admit a couple more people. Here we go. All right, so the form is essential in ensuring transparency and compliance in your buyer representation changes. Paragraph 4 instructs the new broker to do a new agency confirmation and any necessary paperwork when they are already in escrow. Okay, so what that means is, let's just say that you are transferring from another brokerage to Keller Williams, right? And you have a buyer representation agreement in place, right? You're in escrow while you're making a transition, right? This form allows you full transparency that one, you must have a new agreement with your new brokerage, signing an exclusive agreement, okay, that you are still working with this buyer, even though you have transferred over to Keller Williams. Okay. That's what it means. And there's circumstances, there's scenarios, because again, working with them is one thing, company dollars and commissions is another thing, okay? No brokerage will release the compensation to the new brokerage. That compensation will still go back to the original brokerage, okay? But they still have to honor, but it all depends on what agreement you have in place. Because there may be a stipulation that you says that if terminating the agreement with the brokerage, they may have the right to, more than, the typical, okay? Or they may say, no, all of it is going to stay here, right? So depending on what you sign will dictate how that money is dispersed, okay? But for the most part, most agencies will say the entire commission will be closed and paid through the previous brokerage. And whatever agreement you had with them, if it was, 70-30, 80-20, 90-10, or 100% will dictate, what the compensation is. Does that make sense? Okay. Paragraph 4 instructs the new broker to do a new agency confirmation and the necessary paperwork when they're already in escrow. I think we established that already. All right, so paragraph 5 defaults to the situation where the agent leaves the original broker for the new broker, but other less common situations are possible. The agent is not a party to the agreement, as buyer representation belongs to a broker and not the agent. So we established that, right? Just like a listing, just like this scenario, it belongs to the brokerage. We have the authority to release it or not release it, okay? The responsibility falls on the brokerage, not the individual agent. The agent acknowledges the agent's responsibility for files. The 3 necessary signatures are for the principal, usually the buyer, and the original and new broker. An agent can sign, but the agreement is valid without the agent's signature. Okay. Any questions so far? All right, let me pull the actual form so you get an understanding what that is. So let me go ahead and stop sharing. One second here. And let me go back to share. Is it showing on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. People on Zoom, do you see the car form?
Yes, we do.
Okay,
Yes,
great.
we do.
Thank you. All right. So this is the actual transfer of buyer representation agreement. Okay. Let me put this up here. All right. So the transfer of buyer representation agreement may also be used for transfer of a tenant representation agreement. So if you're working with the tenant as well, this is the form that you can use for that purpose. Now, this is a sample, and I kind of illustrated the sample, for you, and just again for today's lecture is, how to fill out the TOBR form, okay? And again, always make sure that you look at the most current form. This again is a new form that was created on the release of December of 2024, okay? It's pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to go through the motions of it because again, when you populate this form, it also populates the agency agreement disclosure, the AD form. Okay, so it's part of the process. Okay, so ABC Realty Inc. is the brokerage, right? The past brokerage. So you're going to put the past brokerage if we're transferring. Okay, has entered into a written representation and broker compensation agreement, or if check property showing representation, or check tenant representation and broker compensation agreement, or other. Okay. Date it, okay, you're gonna put the date that you originally had the BRBC sign, okay? If that was December, if that was November, that's the date that's gonna go here. For the sake of today's lecture, I just put 1/2/2025, okay? With it's going to be the buyers, okay? Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. That's going to be the name that you're going to put, okay? That section. If it's a tenant, then that's where it also goes. Hereby, principal for the property identified in the representation agreement. Okay, if checked, principal has entered into a contract for the following property. So if this is a form that is used for a specific property, then you're going to check. Principal means buyer, principal also means seller. Okay, so I want to emphasize that a principal, when you talk about principal, that can be either party. The principal is the buyer, principal is the seller. So if it's a specific property, then you're gonna put that specific property, okay? If it's multiple properties, you can add it, or you can include an addendum or an additional terms on here, which I'll illustrate in a little bit, where you can add the additional addresses as well. If this property is an open escrow is open with, you're gonna put the escrow company as an example, right? You know, whatever escrow company it is, then you're gonna put the escrow number, okay? Escrow number. And then the next paragraph says, broker and principal agree to terminate this agency relationship duties and responsibilities with and to each other, and to transfer the representation agreement to us, okay? Old brokerage, new brokerage. Make sense? So far, we're good? Okay, pretty self-explanatory, right? All right. 1 second, just want to make sure. Okay. It says right here, it's the new broker. All right, let's go through the motions now of how this form works. Number 1, transfer. Principal and broker agree that by signing below, the representation agreement and any addendums or amendments shall be assigned to the transferred new broker. And all duties of broker arising out of the representation agreement shall be terminated, okay? Whatever you had with the previous is no longer part of the agreement, okay? The new broker agrees to the terms of the representation agreement and shall be designated and serve as the principal's broker, meaning the new brokerage, Keller Williams, is now the hosting brokerage, okay? For the purchase or lease of the property, if the new broker and principal signs a new representation agreement, that representation agreement shall replace the representation agreement. Okay, so meaning is if you have a new agreement with the new brokerage, then that now supersedes the old one, right? But remember, paper trail, as I said it earlier, there has to be a termination, okay? Just like when we say that the seller wants to work with us, but they have it listed with another brokerage, we cannot be having dialogue and conversation. They need to figure it out. But ultimately, what we want is the cancellation of listing, so that way it gives us the authority and the ability to now service that listing. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so the part 2 goes into the consideration for release. Okay. 2A, 2B, principal agrees to pay broker, okay, I'm just using as an illustration, $200 for out-of-pocket expenses, costs incurred, and services rendered in efforts to related to the representation agreement prior to transfer of this agreement. Okay, which is a good thing, right? It's a really good thing. Because if you put time, effort, and energy, right? Marketing or whatever the case may be, now they put a provision in there that allows you for out-of-pocket expense. We will release you, buyer, but under the circumstances that you at least pay me for out-of-pocket expenses. Okay. Now don't think it's a commission that you're going to put, all right, and think that it's a $25,000 release. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay. Because they may ask for proof. Well, where's the proof, right? And if you don't have the backing and the proof, they may say, no, I'm not going to pay you $200, right? So it has to be a legitimate, reasonable amount. Make sense? Number 2, if check, principal owes no compensation to the broker. Okay? And that's fine. I'm just illustrating it for today's presentation, but they can also say, look, we're not going to pay you any compensation. Number 2B, new broker agrees to pay 25% of the total gross compensation earned by the new broker based upon principal side of the transaction or a flat fee payable through escrow. Here's the hook, folks. Here's the hook. That hook is, I'm willing to release it to Keller Williams, folks, okay, under this circumstances, okay? We'll release this buyer with the 25% referral. Okay. And it's documented, it's in writing, and there you go. And that might be the only way you can navigate this, because again, the brokerage holds the agreement. Okay. And then maybe a win-win. The buyer agent may say, that's fine, you know, I want to get this deal closed. We're right in the trenches, we're ready to do this. We need to do this to make it work. Okay. Where in the past, a lot of these forms did not have these provisions or languages for this purpose, right? Because ultimately the original brokerage retains the right to the buyer and also to the seller. Make sense? Okay. Section 2 says, or if check, new broker owes no compensation to the broker. Okay. And again, it can be where there is nothing that the new broker will compensate. Then it goes into the agency relationship, right? Which again is attaches to this form. Principal agrees that the agency relationship with the broker arises out of the representation agreement is terminated. Principal acknowledges prior to the execution of this transfer agreement and receipt of the attached disclosure regarding real estate relationship car form AD. Okay, so basically they're acknowledging, hey, we had a legitimate agreement. We had the representations, the do and don'ts. The whole purpose of the agency agreement is the responsibility of the buyer, the responsibility of the seller, the responsibility of the agent, and also if it is a dual agency agreement as well, what are those responsibilities? So what it says here is that it's terminating the agency agreement. Section 4 goes into escrow. If the property is already in escrow, the new broker shall, one, provide an agency confirmation form AC to principal and seller as an amendment to the purchase agreement reflecting the new brokerage agency relationship in the place of the broker, such as car form CAC. 2, execute and deliver any new documents related to the compensation and that the necessary for escrow or seller broker. And 3, execute any further escrow instructions as may be reasonable necessary to confirm the transfer of the representation agreement to the new broker. Okay, we're not going to go into too much of a trust funds because that's typically not usually something that we do. And then number 6 goes into agent. The representation agreement will obtain through, okay, John Smith as the salesperson or broker associate working through the broker. Okay, that's the agent that was either working with the buyer or will also be working with the buyer with the new brokers. Let's say that John Smith transferred over as well. Okay. Section 6A goes that agent is no longer affiliated with the broker as of the date and will no longer be affiliated with the broker. Agent is applicable or is and will not, if checked, be affiliated with the new broker. Okay. So meaning is we're full disclosure, we're saying, hey, yeah, this John Smith, the agent, will be working with this buyer with a new brokerage, right? Let's just say ABC Realty, and now they're transferring over to KW, but John is transferring, then we're just saying, yes, he's going to continue working with this buyer, or in this case, maybe no, if it's checked. Okay, we're gonna replace and put another buyer in. And then B goes into if check, agent remains affiliated with the broker. Number 7 just talks about the transaction files and documents. Agent acknowledged the obligation to deliver to broker copies of all relevant files, documents pertaining to the representation agreement, and within agent's custody and control that have not previously been provided to the broker. Broker authorized agent to deliver to the new broker copies of those files and documents. New broker acknowledge agent's responsibility and not broker for transaction files and documents that have not previously been delivered to the broker. Okay, again, full transparency. If there's any additional stuff that is relevant to this transfer, then they must provide that as part of the initial process, right? that they're releasing, right? The brokerage is releasing, but they're also releasing any documentation that usually will transfer over to the new brokerage. Number 8 goes into release. Other than a provided herein form, the data forward, broker and principal mutually agreed to 1, release each other from all duties and obligations contained in or arising under the representation agreement. 2, release each other from all claims, action, and demands that each may have against the other by reason of the representation agreement that may arise from the day forward. And number 3, hold each other harmless from any such claims, actions, and demands. However, broker and principal agree that the dispute resolution and attorney fee provision of the representation agreement shall control any disputes arising of this transfer of the representation agreement. Remember, a lot of the stuff is part of the BRBC, right? There's a lot of language in there that protects all parties, including you as a real estate agent as well. Okay. Number 9 just goes into other terms, okay? If there's any specific, as I said earlier, right? Let's say that there's 3 properties that you are putting as part of the waiver or adding it for full transparency. You can add it here, or you can attach an addendum, right? An addendum to it. And it may be even 4 to 5 to 10 different properties that are going to be waived from that transfer, okay? And then the last part is obviously by signing below, the principal and the new broker acknowledges that each have read, understood, and has received a copy of this agreement. Principals, okay, will sign. The broker manager of the previous will have to release it, okay, and acknowledge by signing. And then also the new brokerage will have to acknowledge it, that we also accept that, because we may not accept that. We may say, no, no, no. 50% of money going back to you just doesn't make any sense, because that may be that we're responsible, we're liable, and we're giving 50% to the previous broker for doing nothing. We may not accept that, okay? So that's, again, part of the initial process, why the brokers or managers are involved in these particular scenarios and situations, because, again, agents transfer on a regular basis, okay? Thoughts, questions, or concerns regarding the transfer of biorepresentation agreement, okay? I know I threw a lot at you, and with all of the changes, with all of these new forms, it's hard to maintain and keep track, right? But in essence, the more you're practicing, the more you're engaged, the more you're asking questions, the better you're going to get at explaining this and how it all works. You can always rely on the office too to support and help you through these forms, okay? This form in particular is one that is probably not going to be used on a frequent basis, because most times when an agent transfers, they don't usually have any business right now. They don't have anyone working. But if you are, then this is the form that must be used for the purpose of full transparency of what we're trying to accomplish. Because the problem here is, if you try to go under and not let us know, and we found out that there was a buyer agreement while you were with our office or their other offices, they may come after you for damages and breach of contract. So play it safe, folks. Be open about it, okay? And I understand it's an interesting field to be in, but you always want to do the right thing, okay? So, thoughts, questions, or concerns? Anyone on Zoom? I know there was a couple, let me check real quick. There was a couple people here that had questions. Does this happen often or pretty rare? Very rare. Doesn't happen that quite often. Pamela says, so is this wise to have a non-exclusive buyer representation agreement signed for people that come to my open house, providing that they do not have an agent? So, good question. It really depends, for all of us, right? For all of us, we should have an exclusive agreement, because again, if I'm going to put time, effort, and energy, I want that in return, that I am your exclusive agent, right? Now, pros and cons, you have an investor that comes and says, look, by the way, I'm an investor, I buy homes. If you can find me and identify a ugly house that I can fix, renovate, and sell, then I'll work with you. Most likely, they're not going to have an exclusive agreement. Why? Because they're probably pitching that with multiple agents because they're looking for the next property that they can buy and sell and make money. Why would they sign an agreement with you, an exclusive agreement? Okay, so that's where a non-exclusive will probably benefit that buyer. But it's up to you. It's up to you. You don't have to have a non-exclusive, but if there's a potential, why wouldn't you, right? You need to focus on the people that are ready to buy, they're ready to sell, ready to invest. If one person says, I'm not going to sign an exclusive, that's okay. There's thousands of people that are willing to work with you with an exclusive agreement in place. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so, okay, I think that's all. Anyone else have any other questions before I give you back 8 minutes of your time? All right, well, that concludes our class. Thank you, thank you. I really appreciate you all. And again, if you have any questions, email me, text me, and I'm here to help you. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Appreciate
Thanks,
you all.
Simon. Okay.
Thank you.